Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today I have brought for you some updated information on COVID-19 vaccine and its effectiveness and safety in autoimmune population. So I have done two other videos before this that I really recommend you go and watch if you're new to my channel, because that has lots of basic information on this topic. Today, what I have for you is I have done a summary of a lot of the recent studies that have come out in the autoimmune population. So when originally the vaccine was approved by the FDA, the clinical trials that were done, that did not include the autoimmune population. But now as more and more, vaccinations have been done in the autoimmune population, there have been studies that were done on this population as well. And the results of those studies are beginning to come out and have come out already. So based on that, I want to just give you some updated information that will talk about the safety of the vaccine in autoimmune individuals, as well as its effectiveness. So that's, so those are two basic things that people are concerned about, right? In terms of the autoimmune population, they are concerned about the safety because they already have a compromised immune system. They are wondering if, this vaccine can cause flares, or, whether it can lead to lead to development of another autoimmune disease or anything like that. And then the second concern is by people who have already taken the vaccine. They went ahead and got the vaccine, and myself included, but we have those concerns whether this vaccine is ultimately going to be effective against the COVID virus if we do get, infected by the virus. Because we know that as our immune system is compromised, and especially if we are taking any of the immunosuppressant medications, there are all those lingering questions whether the vaccine will be effective or not. So based on that, I have done some research and I present to you the results of those research. Now, number one thing I want to tell you or caution you is this is based on the limited research that I have done. So take that with a pinch of salt. This should spur you to do more research yourself, and also maybe, motivate you to talk to your healthcare professionals and your doctor, who will then further give you proper medical advice. This presentation is not intended as medical advice. This is just intended as some to give you more information based on trial or studies that have already been done. It's just like a compilation of information, but always talk to your doctor before you consider, taking any, making any changes to your medications, or if you have any concerns about your health. All right, so let's get started. All right, so let's look at what the latest data says with regard to the vaccine safety. How safe are these vaccines in autoimmune patients? So there was this study that was done in around 1,400 patients with rheumatic and muscular diseases called as RMD, and who received both doses of different mRNA vaccinations, and those patients were evaluated for adverse effects. The most common therapeutic regimens, that means the medications that these patients were on, were conventional anti-DMARDs, like your synthetic DMARDs like hydroxychloroquine, methotrexate, etc. Or they were taking combination therapy, that is synthetic DMARD along with the biologic, or they were just taking biological therapy alone. So now in all these patients across the board, there were a total of only 11% reported a flare. And in those patients, 11% who did have a flare, these were the characteristics of those patients. Those patients had a history of flare in the prior 6 months. And second thing was that they also were using combination therapy. Now, so those two factors or characteristics in themselves are an indication or a risk factor for a flare, because that just says that they have severe disease, to begin with. So it's possible that people who have a severe autoimmune disease are more inclined to develop a flare. And then the other risk factor was also that previous COVID infection. So, for example, if somebody had, gotten a COVID infection before they were vaccinated, so they were sick with the COVID virus, then that was also a risk factor for a flare. That means that somehow made them more of a risk for getting a flare. So though that's what was seen in this study. Now, in my experience, I also, had developed an acute flare after my first vaccination, but it just lasted around, less than 48 hours. And after that, I was fine. I had a severe flare of my knee. My knees got severely flared up, but then it subsided. And after my second vaccination, I did not have any. I just wanted to throw that out there as well. And then in terms of other side effects, they were, largely similar to what other patients experienced, meaning patients who were not, who do not have an autoimmune disease, the kind of side effects that they experience, the same kind of side effects were experienced by these folks as well. However, myalgia, that is muscle pain, and fatigue, somehow the incidence of these two were a little bit higher in the individuals who had an autoimmune disease. Next, there was another study that was published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology. By the way, in my description box, I will make sure that I place links of all these articles or all these studies that I'm talking here. All right, so now this study was published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology, and it specifically looked at adverse events after mRNA vaccination in people who had inflammatory bowel disease, which is also an autoimmune condition. So in this study, there were around 250 adults, so not a very big population, however, decent size. And it was seen that, again, the frequency of the adverse events were very similar to that was reported in the general population. And if you want to take a, more of a detailed look at what was reported in the general population, my presentations 1 and 2 will cover all that, where, I talked about all the adverse events frequency that was observed in the clinical trials. So this study is saying that they were very similar, across the board, even in the autoimmune population. However, it noticed that the adverse events were slightly more common among younger patients, and again, those with previous COVID-19 infection, which is what the first study that I talked was also saying the same thing. And then adverse effects were less common in individuals receiving advanced therapies with biologicals or small molecular inhibitors. So now this is very interesting, and this will also, again, come up later on when I talk about another study. But basically, this study observed that people who were taking some biologics, I believe anti-TNFs is one of them, so those anti-TNF medications like Humira, Enbrel, etc., that category of medications, it said that the adverse effects were less common in such individuals. So that's very, very interesting. Now, next thing, there was another study that was done in Netherlands, and what it does is it was like a survey that was sent out, and it was a questionnaire that was sent out to people, people with autoimmune disease who had vaccinations, and then they were asked to report, self-report in that survey what kind of side effects they experienced. And this was done, for after vaccination 1 as well as vaccination 2. And this is like a compilation table here of that. And what you can see is that now there are 3, actually I forgot to name them here, but roughly these are the 3 different types of vaccines. So it is the Pfizer one is the first one, followed by Moderna, and this is AstraZeneca. And what it's basically showing is this column here is the the patients, that is the people with autoimmune disease, and then the right-hand column is the patient are the controls. That means those who did not have autoimmune disease, and then this is reporting the percentage of these side effects. And as you can see by the bars, in general, if you just compare the bars, then they look very similar in those two columns. However, there is one thing that was seen, that is joint complaints. The different reactions include injection site reaction, right, which is the largest one across the board in all these three different vaccines. And then there is fever or chills, fatigue, headache, etc. But then the last one is joint complaints. And as you can see in all of these joint complaints, so you can see that in the left-hand side, which is your autoimmune population, there are, that there's a blue which says that there is a small percentage of people. It's less than 5%, but nevertheless, there is, that small percentage of people who are suffering with joint complaints, and that is not seen in the control. Control is again not the autoimmune, but the general population. So in the autoimmune population, there was more joint complaints that were noticed. So that was one side effect that was different. Next, there was also this large scale data that was collected on safety. It was like a registry. It is actually an ongoing registry. It's an observational registry. And this data is as of, April 27th, 2021, around 1,500 patients across 28 countries were reported. It's like an observational database. And these are people who have, autoimmune disease, and their adverse events were, looked at and compared to the adverse event percentage of other, patients who did not have autoimmune disease. And what they concluded, that researchers concluded that the vaccines have a reassuringly safe profile. That means they were again very similar to patients who, similar to the side effects found in the general population. And then there were some rare reports of inflammatory RMD flare, which is again, like the flare that I talked about in the first two studies too. There was some small percentage of autoimmune population that ends up getting a flare. And this is also 5%. And the previous study also had around 5%. And then 1.2% of the population ended up having a severe autoimmune flare. And there were very rare reports of severe adverse events. It was less than 0.1%. So this was across 1,500 patients. So, this just gives you an idea of how many people are actually, getting these, like bad adverse events, because you may, hear anecdotally and in the newspaper, about some person getting some, or some a really bad flare up from the vaccine, but you need to look at it from a overall perspective. What are the percentages? What is the incidence here? So this definitely sheds more light on that. The next thing that is also, as I said, on everybody's mind, with people with autoimmune disease, we really wonder, now that we have got the vaccine, is it really going to do what it is meant to be doing, right? So there is one, again, this is, okay, I think I went the wrong way, sorry. So there is this another study that was again done in Netherlands, and it investigated the effect of different immunosuppressing agents on antibody development. So as you know, right, for the vaccine to actually have an effect or impact in preventing the COVID-19 infection in your body, it first generates the immune response. And then one of the ways to measure the immune response is by measuring the antibodies in your blood after you are vaccinated. So this particular study looked at seroconversion rates by actually looking or measuring the antibodies. And this is again a large study. There were around 3,000, roughly 3,700 patients with rheumatic diseases. 546 were also having multiple sclerosis. So it's really a large amount of autoimmune population. And then there were also around 1,100 healthy controls. And so that was the comparison again, So what they found that the seroconversion, that is the antibody formation, was delayed in older patients on specific immunosuppressive drugs. Now, specific is important because this is not across the board for all immunosuppressive drugs, but certain immunosuppressive drugs can hinder the immune response of the vaccine. And I will talk more at length, in my subsequent slides about those drugs. But this study did find that certain drugs, for example, methotrexate, as well as anti-CD20 therapy, and one of the anti-CD20 therapy is rituximab. So that drug, as well as methotrexate, showed to reduce the antibody response in patients who were vaccinated. So it doesn't mean that the response was not seen at all. It just says that the response was diminished. So if, across the board, generally we get, our clinical trials, which did not include autoimmune populations, showed, say, 90 to 95% efficacy in, in the generating an immune response. But in case of people, if they were on methotrexate therapy or anti-CD therapy, that was reduced. And there are some studies which actually measured how much it was reduced by. So let's take a look at that. So these are some other studies which further measured. And so this was a study. It was a small study, but it was done by researchers who looked at people from New York City as well as from a town in Germany. And what they found, again, they did the same thing. They looked at antibody responses in people who were taking immunosuppressants. And when they compared, different immunosuppressant drugs and their vaccines response, what they found that people who took methotrexate, only 62% of autoimmune patients who were taking methotrexate reached an adequate response. Meaning, now this will compare to the 95% that I was telling you before, right? So in general, 90 to 95%, it's 90 to 95% effective, meaning 90 to 95% of patients who take the vaccine will show an immune response. Now here, only 62% of people on methotrexate showed an adequate response. And then in addition, so this was, they were specifically measuring antibodies. And then they also looked at, in this particular study, they also looked at certain T cells, which is also a part of the immune system. And they noticed that even the T cell development were not as high in the methotrexate group as compared with the others. So basically it's saying that methotrexate does limit your vaccine's effectiveness. Now, there was another study which said that it tracked 89 patients in a rheumatology clinic, and they, of those, 21 patients did not show any sign of vaccine antibody, and 20 of them were taking rituximab. So basically, it is saying that people who were taking rituximab, they did not show an antibody response. However, this is by only one dose of a COVID, one dose of the vaccine. Now, there were some other studies, and I'm not sure if I included those studies in the slide or not, but there were some others. There are some other studies which actually show that, they measured the antibody response after the first vaccination, in which the response was lower for methotrexate and some other drugs. But then after the second vaccine, though, the antibody response was higher. So which means that, I'm saying that because in this case, it's just highlighting that 20 out of 21 patients on rituximab, 20 did not show an adequate response. But then this is after the first vaccination. It is possible that after the second vaccination, they might have received, some response. And again, continuing with that same topic on immunosuppressant medications and immune response, so I have some more data here, which specifically breaks it down by the drugs. And I know that a lot of you who are, who have an autoimmune disease and who are taking different medications, you're really keen, just like how I was keen on finding that information. So I wanted to share that with you. I've summarized here based on multiple, articles that I have looked at. And so here is the summary. People who take anti-TNF therapies. So what are the anti-TNF therapies? Those are your medications like Humira, Enbrel, the injectables, like Humira, Enbrel, and they even Remicade. And those were found to have the strongest immune response. Even the other drug therapies like interleukin 17 and interleukin 6 inhibitors, they also they also were shown to give a good immune response. And those drugs are again used in other, autoimmune conditions. And those are basically like monoclonal antibodies. So they're also used in transplant patients as well. So some of them, some of these interleukin 17 and interleukin 6 inhibitors were found to have a strong response. Definitely anti-TNF therapies, because anti-TNF therapies was shown in multiple studies to have a good response to the vaccine. And then those with RA had a slightly lower immune response, 82%. So that's bad news for people like me who have RA. However, again, you have to take all these results with a grain of salt, because now it is just saying those with RA. But it's possible that if you have RA and if you're taking an anti-TNF therapy, then you might be okay, because then your immune response will be likely to be greater than or equivalent to 95%. So, however, in general, people with RA had a slightly lower response. And it's not like it's a very low response, it's just 82%. So it's less than 100%. That's all it's saying. And then, however, the lowest rates below 40% response were found in people with myositis and vasculitis. So these are, again, autoimmune conditions. And there, for whatever reason, just maybe their prognosis is different. Overall, the disease is different. So their percentage was lower. And could also be because of, in general, in vasculitis, there are a lot of other other immunosuppressant agents that are used, like anti-CD20, etc., that I said before, that could have a lower response. So it's possible that that's the reason they are showing a lower response. And then most problematic were people who had taken the monoclonal antibody rituximab. So again, I showed that in a previous slide. So that was that has shown to significantly impair the immunogenicity. That means the immune response of the vaccine. Then the other thing that is important is how long ago had the person taken the drug made a huge difference. So that means the timing of the medication, so again, I will go over that, but in my previous presentations too, I had talked about that talk to your doctor about how long, you need to stop your medication before you take the vaccine. So that in general, the timing of that is also an important factor that makes a difference in your immune response. That's what studies have shown, that it does matter, when you time the drug and when you time the vaccine, that does matter. Then moderately impacted immune responses were seen in people on abatacept, that's Orencia, glucocorticoids like your, prednisone, and mycophenolate mofetil. This is, these are used again in other immunosuppressants as well as, transplant patients. So they definitely had, reduced immune response. Methotrexate yielded a 90. So now see, this is the one where I was telling you before. where I had the slide which said that methotrexate caused, about 62%. So different studies have shown different rates, but so this particular summary says that methotrexate yielded a 92% seropositivity for those on monotherapy and 84% for people taking the drug in combination with others. So again, why these different percentages? You might be wondering, like I said, 64 before, and then I'm saying 92 or 84 on methotrexate, because different studies are studying different diseases. People with autoimmune disease, but they may have a different autoimmune condition. They may be on different doses of methotrexate. And so that combination of those things might result in the different effectiveness rates. But in general, what it's telling you is that if you are on methotrexate, it is very likely that your immune response is going to be lower. How much lower? We don't know for sure. It can range from 64% to even 92% effectiveness, but that there is going to be some impact on that. I myself take methotrexate, so that definitely, does concern me. However, I'm trying to be optimistic, and I'm looking at the 92% here, right? So it's possible that for me, I might be somewhere, around 90%. So my best advice is to continue to do what you're doing in terms of diet and lifestyle, right? Which is what I mainly talk about. So if you're new to my channel, do look at all my, other nutrition videos too, where I really talk about AIP, the autoimmune protocol diet. I also talk, which is not only an elimination diet, but which also talks about lifestyle changes that can help, create an optimal immune setting for you, where you get an optimal immune balance, balance your immune system. And when you do that, then it's possible that you will maximize the effectiveness of the vaccine as well. And then, yeah, so then again, this burning question, right? Is there a need for me to make any changes to medication? So again, as I said before, talk to your doctor. Based on all these, information that I'm giving you, what is very clear based on all the studies is that methotrexate, rituxan, abatacept, mycophenolate, glucocorticoids, which include your cortisone, prednisone, budesonide, all these agents for sure. There could be other drugs too, but all these for sure have shown in studies that if you are on one of these, then it's likely that your immune response to the vaccine could be a little bit lower. It doesn't mean that, that you won't have any response. It's only telling that your response could be a little bit lower. And then again, is there any changes to the schedule that I need to take? Again, once again, I always say, talk to your doctor, because your doctor knows your complete medical history, and they are specialized in, treating you. So they will definitely have the best recommendation. However, in general, American College of Rheumatology, they recommend the following things. Methotrexate, they say, hold for 1 week after each vaccine dose for people with well-controlled disease. Now, why it says people with well-controlled disease? Again, so if you are not well-controlled, and if you have a tendency to flare up, then if you hold for 1 week, then it's possible that you might end up in a flare, right? Vaccine or no vaccine. So that's why your doctor becomes the best judge in telling you, what would be appropriate for your situation. JAK inhibitors, again, like, there are lots of all these INIBs, that's the Olumiant, tofacitinib, which is Xeljanz, and all these extensions, that end with INIB. Those drugs, again, hold for 1 week after each dose. Then there are others where, abatacept for subcutaneous delivery, again, hold for 1 week before and 1 week after the first dose. And for IV delivery, time the first vaccine only to occur 4 weeks after the drug's infusion, and then postpone the subsequent infusion by 1 week for a 5-week gap. Now, for those not yet on subcutaneous or IV, abatacept therapy can be started following the recommended 1-week delay after the first vaccine dose. So there's a lot of information here. But, talk to your doctor. Rituximab, schedule vaccine about 4 weeks before next scheduled cycle and delay the drug 2 to 4 weeks after the vaccine series is completed if possible. And then cyclophosphamide, time drug administration about 1 week after each vaccine dose, if possible. Again, everything is like if possible, and these are general recommendation, but these are not for you to implement on your own, but these are, something that you bring to your doctor and then take their opinion and their advice. Now, finally, I wanted to just touch upon, and again, a little bit more in detail about what I already talked about, which is antibody development, right? So when I talked about the vaccine response in people with autoimmune condition, and we, basically what we were looking at is seroconversion, which is looking at antibody measurements, measuring the antibodies in the blood after the vaccine. Now, but I wanted to talk about one important thing, which is now becoming, very clear. And this is something even my own rheumatologist and I had a conversation about at my last visit, because I asked him about, how I'm concerned, whether I would be having enough antibodies or not. So what he told me was this. He said that, antibodies do not tell the whole story when it comes to the immune system. The immune system is extremely complex. It consists of not only antibodies, it consists of B cells, as well as, which are the ones which make the antibodies. And then it also consists of T cells, which within the T cells are also, there are like different types of T cells, T cell suppressor cells, T helper cells, and whatnot. Believe me, the immune system is very complicated. So his point was the antibody measurements itself may not be telling us the whole story. And that is what, many other articles that I have looked up recently on this topic, they all say the same thing, that the antibodies may not tell the whole story. So don't be, just focused on that, thinking that, oh, am I getting enough antibodies? Should I ask my doctor to get my antibodies checked? So when I asked that question to my doctor, whether I should get my antibodies checked, he told me this, right? He said the antibodies will not give a clear picture. So because of that reason, he does not recommend doing an antibody test because it could be a false alarm, right? So if my antibody levels for some reason comes out lower, and then, I might feel as if my vaccine is not effective, but that may not necessarily be the case, because it's possible that my other things might be, good. Like, I might have good B cells, or I might have an adequate response of the T cells, which may make my, vaccine more effective against the COVID virus. So therefore, don't get hung up on the antibody measurement, because they may not tell the whole story. And this is, constantly evolving. So I think as we, as the weeks go by, I'm pretty sure that we will have more information on this topic. But I just wanted to share this, out with you guys. So you also understand, like, that it's not just all about the antibodies. And then finally, last thing I wanted to touch about is there a need for the booster dose, right? To especially for people like us, especially who are on methotrexate, like, the list of drugs that we saw that could be giving us a lower response. Is it possible that a booster dose might help? Yes, that might help. Again, there's more research coming, and very soon we will know more. However, right now, on August 13th, the FDA authorized additional dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine for those who are immunocompromised. Now, this is immunocompromised. Do not read this as all autoimmune, right? So it's your doctor who will decide who is immunocompromised, depending upon what is their autoimmune condition and what level of immunosuppression, meaning what is the dose of immunosuppression therapy and what is the type of immunosuppression therapy that they are on. Based on that, it's decided whether a person is immunocompromised or not. In general, it is specifically solid organ transplant recipients, because they are the most immunocompromised, so because they've got a transplant and then they need to be on very, very strong immunosuppressive medication so that the transplant is not rejected. So those are the people who have been authorized the booster dose. And then other fully vaccinated individuals right now, right, who just have an autoimmune disease and taking any taking any immunosuppressant medication, right now, you do not need an additional vaccine as of now. But again, that's a possibility, and that might come about in the very near future. But stay tuned for more information. I hope you found the information I presented useful, guys. Please, again, do share your comments. I love to read through them. Again, though, there are lots of people who will ask me specific questions, related to their medical situation. I want to again emphasize that I am not qualified to give you a specific medical related answer for all such questions. Your doctor is your best bet. My objective, my goal here is to give you a lot of information so that you have, you feel a little more, knowledgeable and enlightened. And then your next step should be to take this information and go to your doctor. And then, between, your doctor and you can then come up with, any dose changes or any other changes that would be required to maintain your optimal vaccine response. All right. All right. Thank you for watching. Bye now.